So, hey everyone, it's Pete. I'm here with Brandon from CARPAY, and we're doing Founder in Focus with Social Leverage. And today I'm talking to Brandon, who founded CARPAY. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Thanks for having me.
So, let's just dive right into it. Kind of, if you don't mind, one of my first questions I like to ask is to get an overview of what CARPAY is and what you do. Kind of like, I guess you could say, a quick elevator pitch.
Yeah, so we help buy here, pay here dealers, which means used car dealerships who finance customers in-house or on lot. So customers with no credit or poor credit where they can't get financed through a bank. Some car dealers, about half of all independent car dealers, will extend credit to buy the cars off of their own car lot. And so we help those dealerships grow through two ways. One, with capital, we connect them with lenders. And then number two is we help them scale their collections operations with tech. So our loan management software.
Oh, so yeah, okay, so I understand. So, how did you actually come up with the idea to start this business?
Well, I got into buy here, pay here when I was 18. Right out of high school, I opened up a used car dealership in Pensacola, Florida, and was buying super cheap cars at auction, $1,000, $2,000 cars that were too old for banks to finance. So I started doing this, what's called on-lot financing or buy here, pay here. And within a year, I had sold 250 cars. Did like over $1 million in sales. I had built a loan portfolio that I was managing in-house, and it was striking to me that all of my borrowers that were making their payments to me had to call me every Friday or every other Friday to make their payment, or actually visit my dealership to make their payment. When on the other hand, I was using Snapchat, to communicate with my friends and family. So there was a clear disconnect between the tech that was offered to me, this small mom and pop car dealership, and the tech that was possible. And so I set the origination of CarPay was my borrowers should be able to make their payments online and through a mobile app. Like that was a very obvious thing to me. And as I got into the process of building out a portal for myself, I realized that there was a bunch of other dealers who could use the same tech. So we built it into a product that other dealers could and began to start using.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one of the things that always fascinates me with a lot of founders is kind of this need to scratch their own itch, and that's kind of what this sounds like. So when you're going there and you're doing this all, and you talk about the ease of an app and doing that, where does one even begin to start walking down that road? Like, how do you take this idea? What are some of the first steps you take as you turn this idea into what eventually becomes CarPay?
Well, I was never into tech. So for me, I went online and found a freelancer that I could pay, just a monthly retainer. Actually, the long story is I paid a Russian firm to do the work for me as a contractor, and that didn't work. So then I found another onshore developer, just one guy in Oklahoma City who could do this work for me as I was running the dealership. And eventually we decided to, as we realized this was a larger problem and that other dealerships could use this, we decided to found CarPay and start letting other dealers use it as well. And he would become my co-founder, still with us today as our CTO. And that was it. I moved west within maybe a few months of connecting with Nick. I was already in the process of slowing down the dealership. I ended up selling most of my loans. I sold the land, I sold all my inventory, and I had some loans left over. But eventually I'd move west and raise money for CarPay, and that was it.
Yeah. So you said you started out in Pensacola. It sounds like you ended up in Oklahoma. How did that happen?
That was just the power of the internet. Nick, who was my co-founder, was in Oklahoma City. So when we first started, I was there for a few months as we were there was a dynamic development process of like day to day feedback. And at some point it made sense for me to be closer to spend more of my time networking to make sure we had fundraising and those types of things. But yeah, the power of the internet. Nick was in Oklahoma City. I drove there, we met, we clicked, and that was all.
Okay, so do you guys still have that car lot today, or have you sold that?
We do not. Yeah, I sold that as soon as I left Pensacola. So in 2015.
Okay, and now you're full time dedicated to the CarPay. You don't have
Absolutely.
any dealerships. Okay, yeah, that's pretty awesome. So like I said, I'm kind of a car guy myself, so this is fascinating to discuss this and meet you. But it's interesting the transition from into startup land. And one of the things I'm curious about is once you develop this, and you said the first one kind of didn't really work out, and you've moved on to the next one. What's that like to go, and what's it like to start? Like, where does someone who wants to do something like this get started finding support, or finding, companies like Social Leverage who will come in to, what's it like to be in pursuit of seed investment, for lack of a better way to describe it?
I can share my experience, which was I had no connections at all in tech. And so if we're coming from the context of a person like that, I think incubators are the best way to get started because they connect you with a lot of, I mean, they seed your network. And from there, you meet someone who can introduce you to someone who can introduce you to someone. And eventually, if you turn enough stones and the idea, holds water, then you'll find the funding partners that you need, or whatever, the co-founders that you need, the technical lead that you need. So if you were a second time founder, it's a totally different story, right? If I were to start a company today, I wouldn't do incubators. But if coming from where I came from, Pensacola, no one talked about tech. No one knew anything about startups. It was a abstract world in the Far East that just we knew existed. So for me, and that from that context, I think incubators are great. And we did one in Charlotte called Queen City FinTech. And then our earliest institutional investor was a firm called Amplify LA. They're here in Venice Beach. And they really are a pre-seed investor, but they have a lot of the infrastructure of an incubator. So they introduced me to Social Leverage, who ended up leading our seed round, and Social Leverage introduces us to the next round of people. So getting started, if you're starting from zero, I'd find the incubators are great communities.
Yeah, so that's great advice, but let me go a little bit more into your entrepreneurial spirit. And I want to just ask, were your parents entrepreneurs? Like, where did you catch this entrepreneurial spirit from?
They weren't. My parents were both government employees, but what I think I'd trace it back to from the time I was about 12. My parents they had another house in Biloxi, so it was a few hours away from where I grew up, and my dad actually got a full-time job there whenever I was around the same age. So 4 days of the week, 3 to 4 days of the week, they were gone, and it was just me. I was 12 years old, and my sister and brother, who they were 16 or 18 or whatever. But I had a bicycle. Me and my friends all had bicycles, and we were free. And so they wouldn't leave me with money. They'd leave me with, food in the fridge and food in the pantry, and I was fine. And my brother was old enough to be responsible. But we were on our own, not in a life and death sort of way, but if you wanted to go to the movie, if you wanted to go out to eat, these were things you had to do. You had to figure out how to do yourself. And so that I trace the do it yourself, no one's going to do it for me attitude back to that. And then the first real taste of business that I had was on eBay. When I was at 16, me and my neighbor started importing products, Apple accessory products. So Apple cases, iPad cases, stuff like that from China. We'd get boxes of hundreds of these things and we'd sell them on eBay. We bought them for $12. We sold them for $40. And after shipping and eBay fees, we made $20 per case that we sold. And so we would go to school and come home with sometimes 20 cases and order $400 in a day. And at some point I was making more money than my high school teachers were. And so already jaded with school. And what happened, my teachers in my eyes lost all credibility, the little credibility that they did have. And so I knew I was like, I wasn't going to college. I was going into business. To me, it felt like freedom and it felt like owning my own destiny.
Yeah, so that's awesome. I like that entrepreneurial spirit, and hearing and learning about that and hearing more about that. So my next question is going to be, how did cars come to be? What was the thing about cars?
The merge of cars was the simple logic of a 16 to 18-year-old. At some point when I had concluded that business was the route for me, one of my brother's friends' dad was Pensacola wealthy and owned a car dealership, a used car dealership. That was actually a buy here, pay here car dealership. And so he always had a new cool car because you can just slap a dealer plate on it, drive anything you want. And he always, and they were wealthy in Pensacola terms. And so to me, it was like, I want to be in business. This is a business that is similar to my eBay business where I'm just buying something for one price and selling it for another price. And I liked cars. So it was my dream to become, I started taking my dealer license courses when I was 16. And so I knew that, and I paid $800 for some course that's came in a binder just for, which wasn't even required. I was just like obsessed with becoming a car dealer.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, little interesting story. I washed cars at an independent car dealership. I grew up near Clearwater, Florida, in Tarpon Springs, and
Wow.
there was a buy here, pay here lot, and the guy had in the back of the lot rotting away a Lotus Europa, and I was probably 14 or 15 years old washing cars at the lot, and the guy's like, you can have it for $5 if you take it away. So I brought my dad down there. He took one look at it with the tree growing through it, and he's like, "No, we're not doing this." So yeah, um, interesting. I have that huge love of cars too. So it's great to talk to you. So let me ask, what was your first car? You're doing all this. You're taking these courses. You've got the binders. You're about to become, Pensacola rich as your own independent dealer. What's your favorite car?
My favorite car was actually inspired by another one of my friend's dads who had an M3. He had like a 2001 M3 and it was black. And he took me on a ride one time when my parents owned like a minivans and stuff. And so I
Yeah.
went to my friend's house and we went to go eat one time. And on the interstate, he just like pulled into the left lane and just punched it. We were doing like 130 or something like that before he got off it. And I was like, wow. This was the first time that I had been in a car that was like a real car. I mean, this was a super cool car, and I thought it had a lot more flavor and taste than like a Corvette or something that everyone recognizes as like a cool car, because the M3 just looks like a regular BMW, but it's not. It's a
Right.
race car that looks just like a regular BMW to the average person. And so when it came to get time for me to get my first car, I found out what my mom paid for my sister's. And so I said, if you'll give me the same amount of money you gave my sister for her car, I'll pay the delta for an M3. I want an M3. And she did it. She bought me an M3 for my first car. I paid her off the delta.
Okay. Yeah. I'm a little jelly here, but yeah,
And,
let's keep
and
going. The
and
first car, an M3. I
to
love it.
everyone's surprise, I'm still alive. But I actually think it was important. I washed it at least once a week. I took really good care of it. I did. It really instilled my passion for cars and for the industry.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's awesome. So, I mean, it's a nice feeling to work within an industry of something that you're passionate about. So,
Totally.
let me move on to some other things just about entrepreneurship in general. Um, so when you're working through this, what are some of the things you do to generate like new ideas to come up with, I know you saw the need when you were doing your own independent lot for kind of what Howard, our general partner, in fact, one of our founding partners, calls creating, a messy back end that's covered by an elegant UI. So, what are some of the things besides just fulfilling your own need, but what are other things you do to try to generate new ideas as you move forward?
I I tend to be pretty abstract about things first. I tend to there's kind of like a bottoms up way, which was, here's a need that I knew I had as a dealership that to solve this issue. But then you can think more top down, like macro down, and the us and the product merging into what it is now, which is we're really a fintech and data company, and the software platform that we offer to dealerships today, it's a tool that allows us to open up the capital markets for buy here pay here dealers, because we have $3 billion of loan data on our buy here pay here loan data on our platform, and across hundreds of dealers across the entire US. And so what we've been able to do is to understand that buy here pay here loans, individual by individual, are hard to predict who will default and who won't. In fact, it's maybe impossible to get to predict if a bunch of people have no credit score or the very thin credit score or bad credit, the banks are saying we can't predict which of these customers will default and which ones won't. And the buy here, pay here dealer says, I don't even try. You know, the buy here, pay here dealer just says, do you have a job and do you have a down payment, and I'll give you a loan. And the dealer's mindset is, I have a GPS on all these vehicles. The third of my customers that default and I need to pick up, I have a GPS and I go and I do it, and I resell the car. And so, but they don't try to predict which customers fall into the third and which customers fall into the 2/3. You know, their underwriting box is just big and wide and open. And dealers have a binary underwriting model basically. But what we've been able to do is actually to see that where borrower by borrower prediction is basically impossible, predicting the dealer's whole portfolio is actually super easy. It's super easy for us, and the ability to predict is very solid. So when you're looking at $3 billion of buy here, pay here loan data, the consumer level data is hard. But I could look at a dealership with $2 million in receivables and another dealership with $2 million in receivables, and I could tell you which dealership would we pay more over what period of time. I could say this guy will have $1.5 million in collections over the next 2 years. This guy will have $1.1 million in collections over the next 2 years. And so what that allows us to do is to open up the capital markets for these buy here, pay here dealers. We can go to banks and say, look, we can guarantee that $1.5 million of this $2 million in receivables is good. That's collateral. CARPAY will make the guarantee that there's $1.5 million of collateral here. Whereas traditionally, the way people look at auto loans is you'd have to look at this portfolio and say, you could buy these 20 loans from this dealer, or you could buy these 10 loans from this dealer. We haven't done that. We obfuscate the consumer level data to the degree of 90% of our underwriting weight goes on the dealership and their portfolio, and 10% of the way on the borrower and the characteristics. So when we think about how we got to this product, is our dealers need cash more than anything. You know, we're helping them service their portfolio, which is great, but dealers' biggest need is every time they sell a car, they're putting cash in street. And that amount since buy here, pay here started has gone from $0. Could buy a car for $800 and sell it for $800 down. So you'd have no cash in street. Now it's $6,000 or $7,000. Every time you sell a car, you're putting $6,000 or $7,000 in the street, and it takes you 16 months to recover it. So it's a cash intensive business, and the capital markets hasn't opened up to buy here, pay here, because no one's cracked the code on how to make scalable capital access into the buy here, pay here space until us. Our platform, as we watch hundreds of millions of dollars of this paper being serviced every month, it's like the secret sauce is that you rate the dealer by their historical portfolio's performance. And so that's how we came on the other ideas. We know that our dealer's biggest bottleneck for growth is having capital. And so we figured out how can we open up this asset class so that some Wall Street lender who doesn't want to talk to buy here, pay here dealers, who doesn't understand buy here, pay here dealers, can bring $1 billion of new capital into the buy here, pay here space.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess one of the questions I have, like, so you're able to rate it down to like the dealer level, but you know, coming from an independent, how do you what led to like that discovery? What was the kind of the aha moment when you kind of cracked the code for this thing? So I'm assuming that, you know, you're kind of through the app and through the technology, you're able to consolidate all these dealerships, which leads into my tag on question is like, how big is this actual, you know, buy here, pay here market? What are we talking about?
Yeah, the discovery process was very early on. I'm not sure what gave us the clue, but very early on, we understood that it's actually just sort of obvious for if you're in the buy here, pay here space that financing and capital is just core. I mean, you're a finance company. You know, it's effectively you have a dealership and you have a finance company, and you're running both. So capital needs for the finance company is just top of mind all the time. It's not something that you go a single minute without thinking about. So being able to make that easier to get. So I had a line of credit through my local bank, and it wasn't growable. You know, I couldn't sell, let's say 100 cars, show them now that I had $150,000 in receivables, and then use that as collateral to get a bigger line of credit. There would be no way that my local bank would have been able to understand that. So you have to just do it this really slow, organic way usually, or you have to get a private investor, or you have a rich uncle. So the challenge of growing a buy here, pay here portfolio was top of mind to me. And so it might have just been that basically from the genesis of CARPAY, we understood that dealers had a big capital need, and if we could solve it, we would. So that was the answer to the first part of the question. And how big is this market? TransUnion says that buy here, pay here makes up 8% of America's auto debt, which means it's over $100 billion. Buy here, pay here, in and of itself, meaning mom and pop used car dealers are holding $100 billion of collateral of accounts receivables right now on cars that they sold.
Wow, it's pretty large. So let me kind of switch gears, no pun intended here, and come back to a little bit more on the entrepreneurial side of things. So this is there's a lot of moving parts going on as an entrepreneur. What are some of the things that you've looked to for yourself to kind of keep yourself focused and make sure that you're tending to these kind of day-to-day things as you're running and scaling out a business that's part of $100 billion market?
It changes every phase. When it was just me and 3 developers, it was different. But I could speak to now. We have 30 to 35 people, and we have a COO, and he's very operational. We have a chief revenue officer who runs our revenue, and then we have CRO to run our ops. And so most of my time is spent with people outside of CARPAY actually now. So we have a few, maybe 3 to 5 advisors on CARPAY that I speak to regularly. I have them on regular call schedules. We have 4 board members beside myself that I talk to regularly, and executive coach. My way of keeping grounded is I'm getting feedback all the time from people outside of CARPAY, and that's probably half or more than half my time is speaking with people outside of CARPAY and sanity checking everything that we're doing. I mean, for example, recently we made a big change to how we were structuring this credit product, and that was because we were talking with people in the market who had suggestions. I mean, there was an intuitive way for us to do it based on being in the industry, but then there was better ways to do it because of people seeing there were comparable companies in other industries doing similar things, and we could take the learnings from them. It's too hard to have your finger on all those pulses all the time. So if you have advisors that are more experienced than yourself, or that if I have advisors that are a lot more experienced than myself, that's how I stay grounded and stay on top of everything. And then in terms of the day-to-day operations, it's changed a lot. It used to be I was doing everything, and now it's really my time is better used if I'm not doing everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. And along that line, it doesn't even have to be in the car business, but is there a certain entrepreneur that you've kind of looked up to yourself, like from an early age, someone where that's kind of inspired you and motivated you?
Charlie Munger, I would say, is the first person that comes to mind, the main person that comes to mind. He's got he's Warren Buffett's partner, and he's like 90 something, and he's still the vice chairman of one of the biggest companies in the world. But both of their focus is on just like doing the right thing, being stoic, not losing your mind when at the latest trend and the latest fad, just kind of sticking to principles. They're very principled people, and so that always resonated with me a lot, was being principled. And the first memoir I read was a guy called Jerry Weintraub. The book's called When I Stop Talking, You'll Know I'm Dead. And Jerry Weintraub was impactful to me because that was the first memoir I read. I was in Pensacola at the time, and this guy had some super flashy, fabulous life. And so it was impactful because it was like it was eye-opening that these things were possible. I mentioned Pensacola rich because that's the mindset. I mean, I saw a guy who had nice cars, and I thought that's rich, right? And then you read a book like Jerry Weintraub's, and your mind's open. So those two come to mind.
Yeah, that's a good one. I just recently, you nailed it right on the head. I recently came across a Munger paragraph about adversity, and one of the things that was fascinating was adversity is an opportunity to choose to do the right thing. So that was pretty impactful. Any books that you read besides the Weintraub? Anything else that you think would be good for entrepreneurs, kind of help them focus?
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is my favorite book and the most impactful book that I've ever read in my life. I mean, philosophically. So I would say, and that's applicable to anybody that's focused on something that they are passionate about and care about. Zen and the Art.
Okay, so yeah, and keeping along kind of this theme of entrepreneurship and kind of adversity and doing the right things. What would you are there any type of like obstacles or failures that you've faced, and if so, how did you overcome them?
A lot. We've made a bunch of super costly mistakes in terms of time. Like we wrote the first program. It probably took us a year to do it before we realized that we had to rewrite it. So that was super painful. It was just me and a co-founder at the time. But that was really painful. We've made key hires that the people were great, but wasn't a fit, and we've made deals with partners that ultimately weren't good for CARPAY in the long run, and they were hard to unravel and get out of. I mean, a lot of really costly and mistakes with long tail effects, that were the big time mistakes. We've built product that we never shipped or never got to use. I mean, the list goes on, and I think there's the way through it is just to realize that there's going to be a lot of that. I mean, when startups are fast paced, so you have to make big decisions all the time, fast, with not a lot of information, and usually at least some part of your startup, even if you're using the same tech in a new industry, something about what you're doing is novel. You're doing it for the first time, because otherwise
Yeah,
you
right.
wouldn't be doing it, right? So you're doing something that no one else has done before, most likely as a startup. And so there's going to be a high element of failure all the time. And because you're just moving so fast. I mean, you don't there's no process for, if you're making a key hire, there's no 5 or 10 layers of interviews that they go through. You don't have the experience to know that this personality type doesn't work with your management team because you haven't had that failure to ingest that DNA. And so, you go off intuition and stuff a lot, but I think the way through it is just to realize that you take a lot on the chin as a founder.
Yeah, okay. So as we kind of wrap this up and we're coming towards the end, I've got to ask because what are you driving now?
I actually, ironically, don't have a car now. I just have a Harley. I have
Uh,
a purple Harley Davidson Sportster.
well, yeah. So when did you make the transition to California?
When I moved to California, it was 4 years ago, and I haven't had a car since. I've just been riding motorcycles.
Oh, the irony. Yeah.
Yes.
So let me round that out as and just let me ask you, I'm gonna do this weirdly and off the cuff, but what's your favorite under $20,000 car?
Favorite under $20,000 car is still the M3. Yeah,
Okay, so I'm gonna guess if I tell you, let's say 20 to 50, it's gonna be the M3.
20 to 50 is still going to be maybe an old Ferrari, an old used Ferrari. And if you're talking about price that you could buy on the market right now,
You can get for what are you talking, like a
I mean,
Mondeo?
you could get an old Ferrari in decent shape that's drivable, like a daily driver, a beach daily driver in the 50K range.
Wow. Okay,
And
so
then
let me
50 to
give you one
100,
last.
yeah, 50 to 100 would be an R8, the V10 R8,
Oh yeah,
like a
that's
like the
that's an
'08.
amazing. I actually posted one on Twitter the other day that I came across when I was down in Tampa. So it was I love that car. Yeah.
I think it's
So
beautiful. It's like a true super. It's a V10. The engine's right behind you. It has the gated shifter. It's got all the, and it's also one of those cars that 90% of people wouldn't even notice. And that I like understated car. I mean, also I'm Ferrari over Lamborghini, M3s over more flashier cars in the range, and the R8's like it's like the most understated supercar I think that you could think of.
I mean, we're like soul brothers or something here. So yeah. And then let me let me go with the last one. Money's no object. What's your car?
Money's no object. I think maybe I'd buy like the first version of the M3, the E30 M3, so like the 80s M3, because they're like 50 grand for a middle of the road one right now. But if a really nice one, that's $100,000.
So my final question before I let you go is I've been seeing a lot of news lately about kind of the rise. You know, they talk about inflation and the transitory effects of inflation. But one thing I've noticed, kind of anecdotally coming across just through scrolling around, is that there's been a kind of a jump in the price of used cars. How has that affected some of the things you're doing? And is that even something real, or what are you seeing?
It's definitely real. Yeah, the the wholesale market for dealers right now is very tough. If they were used to buying a 2012 Honda for 7 grand, that same car is going to be 10 grand at auction today. And that's tough because making loans as buy here, pay here dealers has become more expensive, or you're selling worse cars. So the increase in the used car prices is definitely very real. It's felt throughout the entire industry, and the way that reverts is new cars have to be the production of new cars has to get back to where it was, because the supply for used cars is all from people buying new cars, and their used cars get pushed into the used car market. So that's definitely front of mind for dealerships, and definitely real.
Yeah. So on that note of just the market in general, and like I said, I love cars, and I'm mourning the new future of electric cars at the same time celebrating it because it's so cool. But because it's always classics for me. But where is electric cars kind of playing a role? Has that had an impact on, you know, just the internal combustion engine new cars? What are you seeing overall?
Well, I only operate in the used car space, and specifically the older used car space. So we're not buy here pay here dealers don't sell 2 to 3 year old cars, and so and the electric vehicles that have been around for 6 or 7 years, are nicer, like Tesla. So we haven't seen I can only speak for the used car space, and the electric vehicle revolution hasn't really hit the buy here pay here space yet, and it'll be 5 years before it does. So I don't know that the electric vehicle revolution has much of an effect on buy here pay here anyways. The only thing that would affect the performance of a buy here pay here portfolio would be the vehicle's reliability. So if every electric car is more reliable, then because the biggest factor of a customer's default is the vehicle breaking down. It's like an
Wow.
old
Okay.
BMW 7 Series, the single biggest factor. An old BMW 7 Series is a lot riskier than a Honda Civic, in terms of underwriting a buy here pay here deal, because it breaks more frequently and the repairs are way more expensive, right? So if electric vehicles are, because they have a lot more moving parts and they're not blowing up every second, if they are more reliable, then that'll actually be really good for the buy here pay here space. The only real like sort of fundamental change that might happen, or that will happen from the vehicle revolution, is the autonomous vehicle revolution, because the idea for that is that vehicle ownership could become so cheap that it would change buy here pay here fundamentally.
Yeah, so that brings up something interesting that's fascinating because earlier in our conversation, you had talked about the data that you're pulling and all the data that you have and how it makes portfolio decisions. Are you able to weight kind of the reliability of, say, a 7 Series versus an Accord into the portfolio?
Well, we don't have to, because a dealership that sells 7 Series, that even sells them, is going to have a worse performing portfolio than a dealership that just sells Honda Civics, right? So it will show up in the dealer's history. We don't have to go through and actually analyze, did he sell 27 Series this year or did he not? We just look at the portfolio and how it performed over the last 3 years, and that tells us how it'll perform over the next. By and large, So we put 90% of the weight on the dealership and 10% on the borrower. So those types of factors we know exist in the consumer by consumer credit modeling, but we don't actually have to model the consumer that way.
Okay, so you're confident in the weighting that you're giving to the overall portfolio based on a dealer by dealer.
That's
Yeah, okay.
exactly right.
All right. Well, hey, I want to thank you very much for coming on to this first of mine, Social Leverage Founder in Focus. And it was really, really great to have the conversation with you. And I wish you guys the best success. And I'll talk to you sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.